We were talking about what it's like to work with an architect and, I guess, advice for working with an architect and the things clients can do to help ensure that the project runs smoothly, comfortably, that they're happy, they're confident what's taking place. Even if some of the stuff we talk about in this recording, someone listening who is a client might think, well, shouldn't the architect be doing this for me? Why do I have to do this? I get it. You might be right also, but in the spirit of being proactive, everyone being proactive to ensure a better outcome, we're going to talk about some stuff you could do.
So what is the first thing that one can do when working with an architect?
The first piece of advice is to find the right architect for you. And anyone
Sounds pretty simple, though.
It's interesting. I think when clients go to select an architect, right, there's a few different criteria they have. There is maybe a budget kind of as one aspect of it, their availability. There's kind of like more quantifiable things like that.
Where they're located, yeah.
Where they're located, like things like that. And there's also probably most often looking at their work to see if their work is what if you like their work. That said, we should kind of unpack what it means to like someone's work. I actually think that the most important thing when it comes to selecting an architect for you is feeling like you're aligned with them philosophically. So yes, you should like their work, absolutely. Do you need to like their work so much or be so specific that you're going to say, I want to do a version of a house you've already done? No, right? So I think you should choose an architect that does the type of work that's roughly in the direction of where you're thinking, but you don't need to be so closed-minded as to say it must be an architect who does exactly what I'm looking for. Like there's a big difference between the same direction, the same style of projects. Style meaning the categories of classical, Spanish, French, Chateau, and modern and contemporary, to use a few of the many terms. Like in those lanes, you should be in that direction, but you don't need to be. You probably shouldn't be so specific to say that you've done this exact thing before, and therefore I'm going to use you.
Like it's pretty clear for architects, there is architects who do like traditional work, there's architects who do like more contemporary work, and those are kind of like the two big camps, right? But I don't think it's necessarily that obvious for people outside of architecture to think about architects being specialized, let's say, in one camp or the other. I think a lot of people do think that maybe the things we learn in school, that we can do either or, and therefore it doesn't always come to their mind that reaching out to an architect who does modern for a project that's going to be very traditional, it's probably not the best alignment.
It's a terrible alignment.
And if you're the architect that's being reached out, you should it should be clear to you. You should be like, look, this is not my forte. I could probably figure it out, but I'm not the expert here. So if that's what you're going for, that's not me.
I would think of the architect more like an artist in this kind of part of the conversation. You wouldn't commission a contemporary abstract sculpture artist to do, I don't know. I'm not well versed in art, whatever kind of art from
Rodin sculpture.
Yeah, or something that's hyper realistic, that's meant to be just a copy of reality of a landscape. That makes no sense. You would never do that. And why would you not do that? Is it because of a lack of skill? Possibly. Let's say we're just comparing sculpture to sculpture or painting to painting to keep it even more related. Modern abstract painting versus hyper realistic painting, right? The abstract artist, if they're classically trained, probably has the ability to do what you're looking for, right? So it's not a skill issue. It's not a lack of capacity issue. The issue is a philosophical misalignment. They're not interested in doing that. That's not their belief system. It might sound pretentious to talk about belief systems in architecture and for architects, but that's how architects think, right? So, like we do the work we do because we believe in it. I don't mean the specific work, yes, that, but I mean also the approach to the architecture, right? So another way to describe it, if you're a client and you're a bit of a futurist, then we would be a good fit for you. An architect who thinks about the future and thinks about their work as being contemporary and of the future is a great fit for that person. If you're a client who's very conservative, more of a traditionalist, and that's what you want in your architecture, and that's your whole being, then someone like us, we're not a good fit. And in the same regard, if you're a client who's like, I just want to copy this thing but kind of reformat it to my house. Not a good fit. Even to the point to where for some architects, even if you're quoting one of their own projects and you say, I like that project, can we do a version of that? Some architects will be like, yes, the outcome could end up looking like that, and that's fine, but the mentality is wrong. Like, that's not who I am. Yeah. Even if in the end it is similar, but the path we get there has to be, honest and feel correct, and not just a copy and paste, because that's not what I'm not interested in. That's not what I do. So when I talk about finding the right architect, that's actually a big part of it.
But I think it's hard because a lot of people look for hiring architects mostly through looking at their website and their portfolio, seeing the type of work that they've done before. Do I like it? Do I not like it? Or maybe there is a friend or a family member who used an architect. They were pretty happy with them and recommended the name, and that's that. I feel like oftentimes the research and selection process on who you're hiring for your project isn't necessarily very thorough, or isn't considered as an important thing.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, I need someone who could do that.
Yeah.
You know, rather than like, and there is different mentalities. Some people are like, I just need someone to get it done. And some other people are like, I need to find the right person to do this specific project. And they're kind of like two different types of clients. Let's say.
Yeah, we could probably do a whole recording on how to find the right architect for you now that I think about it. But again, I think the kind of underrated, not thought about aspect of that is not the budget, the schedule, the availability, all those things. We all know that. It's are you aligned? The mission statement of the person wants to be in line with the mission statement of you as a person and the project. You have to be aligned in that regard. It could be that for this one project, your mission statements align, but as people, you're very different. That's totally fine too. We don't need to agree on everything. We don't have the same politics or all this stuff. But if we understand the mission together, then we're good. But that is the most important thing. All the other stuff we can figure out, like budget, schedule, scope even can be figured out to a degree.
Okay, so you found the right architect, and then what?
The other thing that clients can do in the process, which might be uncomfortable for some people because not everyone's built in this manner, is to be very communicative. Talk with your architect often, be open about the communication, and do it frequently, right? This is a very good skill set to have in general, but especially with architects. Now, architects should be doing that too. Like I was saying before, we did a recording where we basically advocated for architects to also work on your communication skills. And so again, as a client, should you have to be this proactive in communicating? One could argue, no, the architect should be the one to kind of, touch base with you and whatnot. But again, I don't know who you're working with. Not all architects practice the same way. They don't practice like us. So be proactive in the communication. Now,
there is a caveat to that.
Yeah.
Which is, don't harass your architect.
Yeah, there is the thing of right. You don't want to micromanage.
You don't want to micromanage. You don't want to also mention every single of your feelings about every single thing, because at some point it's just overwhelming. Oversharing is also not great. On your side, you have to filter what is important for you to communicate to your architect. Yeah. Because they already have a lot in their head to figure out. So bugging them with the smallest thought you have on Saturday morning after you woke up and walked the dog and you thought about this on the project, and the next day you thought about this on the project. You need to kind of also leave space for the professional to do their work. So you don't want to bombard them with a lot of small things. Or if you do, maybe you just bombard them in one giant email and you throw everything in it. And then they can read it at their pace. They could skim through. They can extract what's important. Yeah. Maybe it's the pace at which you're communicating. It's the pace and the frequency. And the predictability. If you're sending text messages every hour because you thought about something, that's too much. That's too much communication.
So talking about the frequency, so folks might be wondering well, what is that frequency? Well, first of all, I think what makes projects work better is when everyone's thinking about what it's like to be the other person. Of course, that's what it means to be part of a team. So architects need to do a better job at thinking about what it's like to be a client and going through a process that you're not familiar with. Clients need to be better at thinking about what it's like to be a quote service professional that's working with a client. It depends on the industries. A lot of us have had experiences on both sides. We just choose to ignore them when we're on one of those sides, which is a foolish thing to do. So I would hope that most clients have common sense enough to know that texting your architect every hour with some random ideas is not a good idea. I would hope most clients would know that reaching out to them once every 3 weeks is also not enough. That's quite a bit of time. I would say not knowing the specifics of, again, the architect-client pairing or the project. If you're a client and you reach out to them once a week or once every 2 weeks, and you do have at most, let's say, a very serious list, a long list of questions and concerns, that is fine. Because it also has to do with how the communication takes place, right? If it's cordial, if it's organized and it's clean and it is as succinct as you can be
during business hours,
that's fine. Yeah. The problem occurs when people send abstract, weird messages or voicemails that don't make a lot of sense and we don't understand them, and they happen at weird times sporadically. That causes a lot of, as you can imagine, if you're on the other end of that, it causes a lot of chaos, right? It's confusing as to what's taking place. So the reason why I advocate for clients to be communicate often and openly is more often I see clients are too shielded. They're too afraid to speak their opinion, right?
Yeah, that's not healthy either. Sometimes the clients who overshare, they're either like very excited or very anxious, or they just need a therapist, honestly, and they're just using their architects to do that, which, to some degree, that's also some sort of services that architects provide with what we do. People who undershare, it's a problem because if you hire an architect, they're designing for you and they need to know who you are, where your head is at, where your mind is at, what's make you excited, not excited, what you're anxious about, what you're happy about. They need to understand who you are. And if you're just too shielded, they're never going to get there. And the project is also never going to get there.
That's correct. So I would I'd rather have a client who overshares than undershares. You're exactly right, though. I mean, it's the same thing. Going back to the doctor analogy, if you go to the doctor and you say, hey, I need to be fixed, and the doctor says, okay, tell me what's up. Let's do an analysis, a diagnosis. And you're like, no, I don't want a diagnosis, and I'm going to give you 2 words as my answer. I feel bad. And be like, right, I need more information. I feel really bad. That's not, I cannot move forward unless I have more information. So,
I mean, it's right. You go to the doctor, they ask for like your medical history, like, are you allergic to anything? Like, what's your ancestors? Did they have any like serious diseases? Like, where are you from?
History,
like all of that stuff, right? And it's kind of like,
it's the same thing with what we do, because it's all about responding to a set of information, right? And a lot of information has to do with who the person is and what they're looking to achieve. Now, we've said many times before, the key to creating great architecture and one of the primary roles of an architect, in fact, is to be really good at asking great questions. That is the beginning of everything. Yeah. If you're an architect and you can't ask good questions because you haven't formulated those questions and you're unable to communicate them, it's not going to work. So again, yes, it's true. The architect should be asking you questions. So let's say we're at the beginning of the project or even partway through. They should be asking you, in the case of a house, how do you live? How do you want to live? How many people do you have over when you have an event? There should be a bunch of asking of questions to pull information out from you, the client. Correct. Will your architect do that? Again, I don't know. So you should err on the side of giving information, right? Because that will inform them, even if they haven't adopted the process which we have, which is to understand people we're working with before we draw stuff.
But the other thing, so the architect is probably going to be asking most of the questions if they're doing their job right. Mm-hmm. But I think it's also important for clients to be proactive on their end and ask questions to the architects as well.
Yeah.
There is a lot of things that architects sometimes don't think about when they communicate to someone who is not an architect. There's terminologies that we use, on the day-to-day basis in what we do that might not be common terminology for someone else.
Yeah.
And you might just be like, what is that word? They just keep repeating, and it's silly, but if you don't understand something, you should be asking them.
Yeah.
Or if you have questions of, well, how is this going to work?
Mm-hmm.
We're putting this here, this there, how is that going to work? What if I ever want to change this? Then what happened? Or even sometimes well, what do you think? You're showing me those design, but what do you think makes sense?
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to the topic of communication that we talked about before, but it's you're working together. It's a working relationship. It needs to go both ways. There needs to be an exchange. It's not just, here, I pay you, architect, and you design my stuff, and it just goes one direction, right? It's a back and forth. In order for the project to exist, there needs to be questions from both sides, answers from both sides, back and forth, and yeah.
On the last thing you just said, it is a working relationship. Now, what's interesting is that some clients approach projects, especially if it's a commercial structure or it's a development project, and they think it's going to be more transactional, or
Right.
they want it to be that. Now, there are cases where it is on the spectrum of being transactional versus more collaborative. It is more transactional. In the examples I gave, also in the case of vacation houses, a lot less pressure with a vacation house, so it's a bit more clean cut in terms of the amount of back and forth. However, almost all clients underestimate how much they're going to care about the project and the design before it's started. They think they're going to be able to say, yeah, here's a brief, go. I'm going to be very hands-off. Very rarely are they as hands-off as they think they're going to be. Because once you get into it, you get excited as a client. You're passionate about it. You want something that's cool. You want to have a say. Obviously, if the architect proposes something you don't like it, you're going to say something. Now you're involved. Or also it hits you partway through. Oh, I'm really doing this thing. My property, my house is going to be torn down. I'm spending billions of dollars. It's real. Or my office, I'm outfitting my office. We're spending all this money. Okay, I have to pay more attention because now I really care. So that's just something for people to keep in mind too. There's this strong tendency for clients to when they want it to be more kind of clean cut, to overestimate what that's going to be like. The other thing you said with asking questions with things that you're concerned with or things you don't understand, that's a really good point, because it's the number one mistake clients make is they don't ask questions. And I will say, from the architect's perspective, the community of architects, in my view, sort of wrongfully get frustrated, right? Like you often hear in these conversations, architects will be like, well, the clients were upset because of this thing, but they've known about it for 6 months. Why didn't they say anything? Why didn't they look? Why? Their fault. And I get annoyed. I'm like, look, I understand what you're saying. True. But again, be proactive then. You be the one to reach out to the client. But in this recording, it's the client's responsibility, right? You should say if you're concerned about something. Don't let your concerns fester and grow, right? You have to communicate and put that out there. I love when clients ask questions about process. I could talk about process, construction, detailing, design. I could talk about all this stuff all day. Clearly, hit me with all your questions. I love it. The thing also with this is that you as a client want to feel comfortable and confident in what's happening.
Yeah.
And you cannot feel that way unless oftentimes you know the explanation for why things are happening the way they are, right? And some folks will want to know, have that information at the beginning of the project, during concept design, schematic design, DD, all the way through construction. They're going to ask questions all the time. I love it. Some clients, so most people, they will hopefully ask questions, good questions near the beginning. And then at some point they kind of stop asking questions, not because they're not interested, but because now we've built trust, right? If I'm a client and I ask you, the architect, a total of 12 questions over the course of the first 3 months, and you have very detailed, thorough responses that make sense to me, the next time I have a concern and it's a relatively minor one, I'm probably not going to voice it because I'm going to think, Marina's got it. I don't need to ask her. I know it's taken care of. If it's a big concern, I'll ask you, and I know that I have this big question, but I probably don't have to be really, really worried because you've had great answers so far. And so as a client,
thank you.
Yeah, as a client, it's weird, right? You're trying to build trust in your architect for yourself, and the way you do that is to ask questions.
It's interesting because I feel like also there is the kind of clients who don't ask questions because of lack of confidence, because they're afraid it's going to be a silly question. You know, many times we get clients who are like, oh, I have this silly question. And oftentimes those silly questions are not silly questions. You know, and they're like, oh, you know, like, what is that? Or like, what do we need that for? Or like, where does it go? Or where is this listed on the drawings? I don't, you know, I must have missed it. And to be honest, actually, a lot of questions come from oftentimes clients not being able to understand some of the drawings because it's a different type of, you know, reading and communication and language that they're not accustomed to. And you know, the ones that are pretty open would openly say like they don't understand something. And then there's the ones that are a bit more hesitant in sharing that because, you know, in some ways it's like you're back in school and you're admitting you don't know something, right? Sure. And not everybody is comfortable with voicing that out. Yeah. But it's funny because once they start asking those silly questions, then there's actually a lot more questions that comes after that. And again, none of them are silly. There's no small questions.
Folks might not realize how complex architecture is. I'm not saying that as a point of like bragging of what we do, but it's just there's a lot of stuff involved. And I think as a result of that, that's also why a lot of architects forget what it's like to be not an architect. Yeah. Because we're like fully in it. We're submersed in it. This is our world. And we kind of live in our own world to a degree once you get to a certain point, because this is your space. And you forget when you show a floor plan to someone, they're like, wait, what am I looking at? What is this thing? What is this element? So yeah, it's perfectly normal to ask. I think the other reason why clients should feel comfortable and validated to ask questions, not just about drawings, but about process, scope, and just the mechanics of how things work, is that if you try to execute a building and you find, let's say a house, residential space types of structures specifically, you find an architect and contractor, they will practice probably a good chance very differently from another architect and another contractor. Meaning to say there's many different ways to do stuff. And that has caused probably for the worse at the detriment of the professions, a lot of confusion as to what architects do and don't do and how it should work. The silver lining, I suppose, for clients is that's the situation. So as a client, you should feel comfortable asking because you don't know, because we practice one way, someone else practices differently.
Yeah. The other thing that I think you could do as a client is, you know, we talked about clients sometimes like over communicating, oversharing, but being mindful of not micromanaging, or like finding that maybe the process should be more transactional than like a working relationship. And I think that goes back to respecting the process that your architect is putting in place for your project. You know, there is some clients that think that they can, as we talked about before, kind of like hack the process, or like make it faster, make it shorter, make it more efficient, or that they want to micromanage, maybe because in their day-to-day role they're managers. That's what they do. You know, that's what they do, and it's very hard if you think about it to go against who you are in some way, right? Like if you are inside like a manager, that's just what you do with everything in your life. Well, it's difficult when you work with an architect not to do that, but it's important not to do that because like, would you manage the process of Picasso painting, you know, like one of his famous paintings? No. And why? Because it would never turn into a Picasso in the end, right?
This also gets back to aligning yourself, or hiring rather the architect that you're aligned with. So it really boils down to trust. You should if you trust the architect, then you trust the architect. If you don't, then it's a problem. Again, I think asking about the process is totally fine, but trying to and having suggestions about the process is also fine. I have no problem with that. And on occasion, clients say something like, "Oh, that's a good idea. Let's try that." Whether that be for design, process, or anything else. But you were talking about this hypothetical client who is a manager. That's what they do in their day-to-day as their job. Well, there are good ones and there are bad ones. We've all worked with good ones and bad ones for sure, right?
I don't know if I worked with a good one.
Well, so what are the hallmarks of a bad manager? First, someone who micromanages. That's like one of the top three, right? Apart from them being possibly an asshole, they micromanage, right? What's the hallmark of a good manager? That they're able to guide people, but they trust the people they're working with. Those are the principles that come to the same thing when you're a client working with an architect or any other service professional for that matter.
And I mean, in a way, the process is also like the way an architect create and comes up with things. And you can't really manage somebody's brain. Like how their chemistry, their ideas, which order, how fast like things are gonna go.
Yeah.
Like you can manage the things you can manage, like you can control, but creativity, the act of creation is if it was that easily to manage, then I think every creative would be a lot more efficient, better, faster. Like it would be different. It would be different.
But
right?
That's the thing too. So even in architecture itself and the designing of architecture, everyone has their own internal way of thinking and process. If we get that fine-grained about it, that's one of the challenges of learning to be an architect, is finding your way of doing things. So, we've had folks who want to get like really involved, and sometimes it's really cool because the way that I think about it is more like just a working session, and I am not concerned about I'm not concerned that the client being super involved, it's going to have a negative impact on the final outcome. I'm not concerned about that because I will make it good. And I also know that the client trusts me. So even if we're working together in a very collaborative way, which is, again, not typical, and the client themselves propose something, and they like it, they're like, I like this idea. I like this thing. I know if I tell them, look, I don't think it works, it doesn't work, here are the 3 reasons, I know they're going to listen to me. So I have no concerns about this, right? But it goes back to trust and being aligned. If I'm an architect and I don't trust that client and I took the job for the wrong reasons because I needed it or something, now I'm really concerned, right? Because and this is some insights into the mentality of the architects. Again, right or wrong, this is how architects think. Architects, a lot of them are always concerned and afraid that something's going to cause the project to die, or that even more specifically, something's going to happen where their design takes a left turn. Now it's completely different from what they think it should be. Having designs evolve and change in the design process is normal, but having it end up in a place that's not good, that they fundamentally disagree with, is one of the 3 biggest concerns any architect has, right? This is also why when you talk to a contractor, a good contractor, they know they will never, ever, ever talk about design or aesthetics with a client. It's a cardinal sin. You stay away from that zone. And contractors know that because they've learned over time how sensitive architects and designers are to that. Because they know architects and designers are always a little bit concerned that some wacky thing's going to take place that kind of just wrecks the 3 months of designing, 6 months of designing they've done. Now, I say all of that mostly so that clients understand the mindset of the architects, to say that if they want to be more involved, you have to do it in a very tactful manner, so as to not freak people out.
I always kind of think that when clients try to take over the process or manage or interfere with the process, it probably comes from somewhere else.
In what sense?
It probably comes from they're trying to take control. They're trying to gain control back on the project somehow.
Yeah.
And it's probably because they're thinking it's not going the way it should be going.
Okay.
Or it's not going the way that they want it to go. Right. So that's kind of like what they do. Unless that's just what they do for everything, then maybe it's not a suggestion of that. But I do have the feeling that it's kind of, it's a way to compensate and feel confident again, right, in the project. And maybe that goes back to communication. Maybe there is something that hasn't been discussed here, and they feel like some things aren't quite right. So they're like, if I just take over this thing and tell them what to do and like, you know, try to move things along, it's gonna help, and it won't help.
But that goes back to, again, the difference between a bad manager and a good manager in a kind of office setting, right? A good manager, they won't do that. They won't take over. They won't assume that what they know in a process that they're not familiar with, that they can do better or they're going to fix it, right? A good manager asks the people they're working with, they voice their concerns and they ask for solutions, right? That's what you're supposed to do. You assess. But it is true, some people, their gut instinct or whatever is just to like jump in. And the bullet point that we wrote down for this part was just trust the process. We didn't quite get this nuance in the notes that we had in preparation for this recording. And the reason why the bullet point was trust the process, because the easiest thing to do is just trust the process and don't fuck with it. Like that's the easiest thing.
Well,
because the and as I said before, every architect practices a little bit differently, yes, but there are phases to the projects. There's schematic design, DD, permitting, construction documents, CA, and then there's concept design at the very beginning. Those things exist for a reason. Documents exist for a reason. The design moves from kind of conceptual thinking and big gestures to more refined stuff for a reason. We select materials at a certain time for a reason. We draw plans at a certain time for a reason. We don't do renderings. We don't do X, Y, and Z things at that moment for a reason. And all of this process has been refined over the course of the profession for many, many, many years. It's been refined by the architect you're working with for many years as well. And it is for a really good reason, right? No one in the profession, any good architect, is just doing stuff because like, oh, this is without thought. Like we're always trying to make it better because that's what we're all striving for. So, you know, if you're concerned, so it's kind of to your point where you're saying, if you're concerned about how things are going, then ask questions rather than assuming that you jumping is going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
It's a space you don't know, you know. To be honest, it's perplexed me when I've seen, most of the time I hear from other architects, they had a client who like, oh, they're jumping in, they're trying to change the process. And I'm just confused by the whole thing, you know. It starts from the beginning. I'm like, well, why did you sign on with that client? Did you explain to them what's happening? No.
I mean, you also never really know. Like you could have a client that's, you know, pretty normal, and then all of a sudden they become like this, you know,
difficult person to work with.
Monster micromanaging everything.
Yeah, it could be
like,
as well. But that's
from?
never a good solution, right? I mean, even if you are a client and you end up in a bad spot, and you're having to do that, you feel like you need to do that. First, find out if you really need to, and then you're choosing to do that because that is the right path, or you think it is. At that point, to be honest, you're trying to repair a team that's broken, and we all know that doesn't work. At that point, I think you might have to switch out some people if it's really that bad.
Yeah. The next thing that I think clients should understand is, you know, once you get into the design process of the project, to remain open-minded. You know, I think maybe some clients expect, you know, like the thing to be the first design presentation you get.
Mm-hmm.
Like the architect is gonna nail it, and the first thing they're gonna show, that's what I'm gonna go with, and I'm gonna love it.
It's not gonna
you know,
happen.
it could happen. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it could happen. It's probably very unlikely unless they're just repeating stuff they've done a zillion times on another zillion projects before, and that's what you want, sure. But it's, like we said before, it's an iterative process. It's you research, you explore, you question, right? It's not just designing pretty things. It's designing things that make sense for that specific client in a way that's maybe never been done before for that specific architect. So there is a lot of things that, you know, are being explored, basically.
Yeah. That's a great mindset to have. And this kind of circles back to the very beginning when we talked about finding the right architects. And I was saying you should choose someone who's, again, in the general architectural style direction that you're looking for, but you don't need to pigeonhole yourself or them to be an exact match. And this is the point of being open-minded to new things. I mean, presumably you're hiring an architect to design something that is special and to come up with ideas that you yourself haven't thought of. So if you're the type of client who's fixated on Pinterest and you're the type of client to say, well, I've already seen what I like, so just do that. Again, it goes back to the parent that don't ever work with us. If you're a client who's like, I like all of these things and maybe somewhere in here there's sort of a direction, but come up with something new. Like, let's see some options. Then you're a good fit for us and probably a lot of architects who think like us. Being open-minded, you know, as you said, it's not just about the aesthetic. So one of the things that I think people don't understand is that, especially in the early design process, when we're proposing stuff to clients, schemes, schematics, solutions, designs, we're not just proposing what the thing looks like. We're proposing a set of ideas that power that thing, that give reason to that thing. Those ideas, sometimes they're very functional, utilitarian, practical things in terms of like living experience and program, budget and schedule. A lot of times, though, they're conceptual ideas for the essence of the project, the thesis of the project. And so what I'm saying is that if you're in a design meeting and you're a client, architect proposes something, and let's say you're early on, and aesthetically it's not for you. You're like, this missed the mark. I don't like it. It's all white. I don't want all white. I don't like it. That is not a productive way to have a conversation, right? Because the architect, I can guarantee you, mostly, or for us at least, what we're proposing, we're not actually proposing a white building. Yes, it is a white building in this rendering, in this hypothetical rendering, but really that's not what we're proposing in this meeting. We're proposing a set of ideas and a direction, right? And that's the core of it. And that's the most important thing. So let's say in this example, there's this white building. You're like, I hate white, or I've decided against white now after I've seen this building. But talk to me about your ideas, or I agree with like the premise of it. It's just the execution wasn't quite there yet, right? That's perfect. That's great. The worst thing you can do as a client, again, is dismiss the whole thing because it's white and then not bother to have further conversation with the architect. Because now you have nothing to build off of other than you don't like white, which is like playing 20 questions, but starting off by asking the first question of, is it a zebra? What are you doing? No, don't ask if it's a zebra is your first question. Ask a bunch of other things, right? And that's kind of what needs to happen in those kinds of meetings. So being open-minded also means understanding that the value of a lot of the conversations with the architect is more to do with their thinking and the reasons why they're proposing the stuff, the why and the how, and less to do with the what, which is weird, right? Because you're looking at the what, but it's not really about that.
Well, at some point it is about the what.
At some point, yes.
But, you know, in the early meetings, like there's going to be a lot of layers that need to be peeled on the orange to get to the core of it. And, you know, the first time the orange might not be the right color. Mm-hmm. But in layer number 12, you're actually going to get to what the color of the orange should be. So I think from a client standpoint, like you want to give feedbacks that are constructive and productive to the project. Mm-hmm. And you have to be mindful in how you're delivering those feedbacks and what you're delivering in those feedbacks. You know, the like, I don't like, it's not super helpful to your architects or your project. Like, again, they're trying to get to your core, knowing who you are so they can better design a building that's for you. And giving those types of non-detailed, shielded feedbacks is really not helpful. And if there is something that really turns you off, well, let's dig into that and find out what exactly is it. Is it the shape? Is it how the size, the scale, the color? Is it because it brings you back to a terrible memory you had in your childhood and you don't want that in your house every day? Like, what is the deal?
Yeah, those are the best conversations with clients because it's really helpful and it's also fun. Like we had one person where I forget the color. It was blue, maybe. I don't know the color. They were like, I just don't like blue. And we were like, okay, well, why is that? Is it this particular shade of blue? Like, what do you mean? And they're like, yeah, I don't know why, but I don't like blue. And they're like, I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer. I really don't like blue. Like, okay, fine. And that's not a great explanation, of course, but it's like, fine. Then you don't have to have blue in your project. I get it. You have some weird thing with blue, which you haven't unpacked yourself. Maybe you should do that with your therapist, but that's fine, right? The other reason, so, we're talking about these, short answers of I don't like, are not helpful. They're actually worse than that. They're counterproductive and they're harmful, because what happens is that you're slowly training the architect to also not ask questions and have further conversations, because you are not participating or volunteering or willing to do that. And now it's really hard to move forward for the next 18 months together. We've all been in situations where we're working as a team and there's some kind of leader, principal, boss, project manager swoops in and they're like, no, and they walk out. And now the whole team's like, oh my gosh, Fred didn't like it. Why didn't he like it? You spend the whole day with your colleagues speculating why the boss didn't like it, right? And you make up all these reasons as to why he didn't like it. And the problem is, now the only thing you and your team are doing the next week while you're working is just speculating what the boss likes or doesn't like, which is actually not what you should be doing. What you should be doing is thinking about what is the best solution given a set of information that aligns with the mission of in this case, the boss, not what they like or don't like. I'll give another example. This happens in architecture and design offices, where the principals who have established the office, they've established a style of architecture. They come into a meeting, they swoop in after the team has done a week of work, and they say, no, yes, no, whatever. And then the team goes back to their desk, and instead of thinking critically, which is what you really want from anyone that you're working with or commissioning, they're just thinking about, I think they'll like this. And they try to create this fake design just to satisfy and get the answer of get the yes answer. And now you're not getting the most out of the professionals, right? Because they're not actually thinking anymore. They're just trying to get a yes. And as a client, hiring an architect, that is the last thing you want. You're not paying them so that you can just say yes. You're paying them so they can produce something that is phenomenal that you didn't think about before. But they can only get there, and they will only be encouraged to get there if they feel like you are actually giving not only valid, but more importantly, carefully thought out information, and you're being open about it. So you can collaborate on that. But if you take this kind of power trip mentality of like, no, who would want to work with a person like that, and who would want to put in the extra effort to come up with something really cool? No one.
Well, and then the next meeting, the client still doesn't like it, and they feel like misunderstood. The architect's not listening to them, and it's like, well,
neither of you are communicating.
But
so
the communication here ain't happening. So that's not.
Yeah. That's
counterproductive. I mean, another common one, honestly, is bring good energy. It sounds silly, right? It's like, well, what does it mean, bring good energy? Like, I'm not, asking you to bring lollipops at every meeting, but like, just show up to meetings and just bring good energy. Like, whatever is happening in your life is happening in your life, and we all have our lives. But I think it's important to kind of like leave that stuff out of those conversations about the project, because the project is enough in itself. You don't need to just shove whatever else is happening around you into it. Let's just keep it clean and focus. And I think that's very important. So bring good energy, be positive, be attentive, just basically be a good team member.
Be a good team member. I mean, that's the thing that I think, there's a couple things with that. I like the team member that you said, because there's a tendency for all clients of any kind of transaction, to think of themselves as being a bit above everyone else. And it makes sense. You're the client. You're paying for it, right? You are in a different tier than everyone else.
Yeah.
But it's also a very negative way to think about it, because you are a team member, and how it turns out, how the process works, how long it takes, and all of it It will be directly impacted by you, not by you because you're the one making decisions, not by you because you're the one paying for it and you have more money or less money or more time or less time, by you as a human being, as a team member, going back to kind of the energy thing. It will impact it has to impact the project because these projects take years. If these projects took a week, then you being on a slight power trip for a week, it makes no difference. But we're talking about years of working together closely with a team of 3 or 4, of the key project stakeholders. So yeah, you have a very big outcome into the chemistry of how it all works because you're one of the team members.
And it's funny because it really, the energy you bring with you, to those meetings, emails, even, phone calls, impacts everyone else in the team directly or indirectly.
Massively.
I don't know, if we work with engineers and we just bring bad energy, well, people are going to feel it and they're not probably going to think about the project in very positive ways, or they're going to see your name on the phone ringing and they're going to be like, oh, this person again, right? Like you want to make sure that bringing good energy means that you want to keep everybody excited and involved in the project and paying attention and giving their best, and it's just trickles to everything that everybody's doing in the team. So
I think the other way to describe what you're saying too is just being professional. So you were saying that these projects are complex enough. Like these projects are like I don't know how to explain them, but they're like I don't know what came to mind, but they're like the mega burrito. Okay, they got a lot of stuff in the burrito. It's fully stuffed. It's fully packed, and it's a burrito that's going to be magnificent. But as you're carrying this burrito from when it's wrapped over to where you're going to eat it, you have to walk very slowly because it's about to unfold with the amount of stuff that's taking place.
I love when you try to do analogies.
But I love burritos also, by the way. But that's kind of what it's like, right? It's this amazing thing, but it's always on this threshold of bursting because there's too much. And when you bring unrelated emotional excess crap into the project, you're overstuffing the burrito with something that doesn't belong, right? And so you don't want to do that because we're right at capacity, even if everything's running smoothly, because of the nature of construction and the complexity and all the challenges that come up that no one could predict. The burrito is already full. Even if it's running well, it's already full. Don't try and do something weird with it. But being professional is a big aspect of that. And this is the challenge also more so with residential work. There's plenty of unprofessional people in B2B interactions, but in the residential space, right, it's much more personal. We're in houses. We're talking about a future house. We're talking about living patterns and dogs and kids and grandparents and things like this. But you have to really remember as a client, even though you are a client and it is a house, this is a professional interaction here. You got to be on time. You got to be courteous. You have to not let I'm not saying we can't talk about your personal life and how things are going, how's your weekend, what's going on with your kids or whatever. That's part of life. That should be part of it. It's part of working together for a long time. But I've been in group project situations with other architects. So this is not a client to architect example, but with other architects. But we were friends. We were working on something, and they were behaving very unprofessional, being late, not doing the stuff they're supposed to do, a bunch of other things that could go on. And I was speaking with them, and I said, this is like not cool. Like you should step up. And their take, which kind of like surprised me, was, well, we're friends. Like this is a friend-to-friend relationship. Like we're working together as friends. And I'm like, no, we are friends, but we're working together as professionals because we were not students. We were professionals. And this was an extracurricular project we're doing outside of work, which, as you can imagine, if you're working 80 hours a week at your office or 70 hours a week, and then you're trying to do something else, like I don't have time to mess around. I said, no, this is a professional to professional interaction that we're having right now. And the same thinking has to be applied and the behavior has to be adopted by clients in projects, especially houses. Don't let don't let yourself think that this is no longer a professional engagement, right? our time is precious. Your time is precious. You're spending money on us being here. We don't want to waste it. And don't let the fact that we've known each other for 18 months let the project unravel to a point to where you're going to behave very unprofessionally because you know us really well. We wouldn't do that because we are the professional. You cannot do that either as the client. So from the very beginning to the very end, there is, even if we become best friends or really close friends, which happens often, it's still professional engagement. And that's something I think all of us probably clients have to keep in mind, I think.
It's hard because, as you said, like you become, you get to know each other more. You're becoming more personal with each other, right? You become friendly to each other, but there is still a threshold that needs to be maintained so things don't get crossed over.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the easy way to understand this is for anyone listening, just think to other examples you've had in your own life, probably even in an office where you get to know somebody and then suddenly they're not behaving correctly. It's like you're being way too casual, like in the office setting. Another brief example, I was part of a music ensemble and I was the leader of the music ensemble. And they were all my peers and colleagues and classmates and friends. Like they were my friends. Like I would hang out with them. They were like legitimately my friends, not just friendly people I knew. They were my friends. And it's always challenging when you're in that situation because in that case, they're equal to you out everywhere else in the world. They're equals, except for in this one space where now it's different because I have to lead the group. And one of them who I was very close with started like kind of acting up and not saying anything crazy or mean, but they were just not behaving professionally. They were behaving in a manner of like as if we're hanging out as friends in the middle of a rehearsal. So it's super awkward. I had to, after the rehearsal was done, talk to them as a friend, but also in this case as a leader and say, we're friends. Obviously, you know this. We hang out all the time. But when we're in a rehearsal, you cannot speak that way. You cannot behave that way. And the way music groups work, it's actually kind of militant in that you have to listen to the leader. You do what they say, kind of period.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, look, if you have ideas of how to do things differently, I'm not opposed to that, but you have to talk to me when it makes sense. And you can't be doing what you did in the rehearsal. That does not fly. Because if you do that next time, I'm going to have to shut you down really hard because that's not how this is going to work. So, I don't know where I was going with that, but that's, things like that
so
happen.
What happened in the next rehearsal? That's
they got it. They're like, yeah, I get it. It was also awkward because they were a lot bigger than I was.
Let's go.
Like, hey, cut it out. But so it is easy, as you said, in these projects to get too comfortable, and you just cannot allow that to happen.
Yeah.
The last thing I was going to say, and this is more for clients just to kind of understand who architects are and they can do with this information whatever they want to do with it. Architects, for better or for worse, historically are very egotistical people. They take a lot of pride in their work.
Well, I think what you're meaning to say, though, is that maybe people think of architects as being more of a technician brain makeup, but actually architects are more of more complex brain chemistry. Like there is a lot of things that go into the brain of an architect, and maybe actually even of any creatives. Mm-hmm. Ego could be a part of that, maybe. But maybe it is ego because they're so invested in the things that they think and create, mm-hmm. Versus if you're just a technician, you're just applying a formula or that one way of thinking to everything that you do. And you mm-hmm. just kind of like repeat that over and over, right? Architects don't do that. Like the process of creation comes from so many places on every single project that it's very complex. And it's very complex to explain that process and those ideas to people who might not even get it. Mm-hmm. And then, they might seem like they have a big ego because of that. Or it might just be because they're just very much misunderstood by most people.
Yeah. So I'm not saying all architects have an ego. I'm not saying that the one that you're going to be working with has an ego. But I'm saying a fair share do. And the reason for that to your point, is that the design and architecture process is a very, very creative one, which a lot of clients forget about. It's hyper creative. So in that regard, for a portion of the project, the architect's more like an artist, you could say, right? And also architects, I do think in the bigger scale from what you said, do feel like they're misunderstood because not a lot of people understand what architects do really.
No,
right? We're kind of categorized as either being the 1% who do wacky buildings, or people think of us as people, as professionals who just make things look nice, make buildings look good, or we're thought about as a very technical service like doing
Engineers,
construction documentations and permitting. And the truth is we do all those things plus a bunch of other stuff. And so most architects feel a bit misunderstood because most clients, the general public, think about the architects as in one of those three ways. And the vast majority of architects get into this profession and are passionate about it, not because of the technical aspects of permitting and construction documents. They do it because they love design. They want to design really nice things that make sense and contribute to society and all this kind of stuff. So, like I said, I don't really know what a person listening to this will do with that information, except for being aware of that. Because I think it's good to know who you're working with. It kind of reminds me of this. I think I saw it on Instagram. This, I guess you call it a meme. I don't know. This short video spoof clip. The scene opens up with Vincent van Gogh. So an actor is playing Vincent van Gogh. He's painting one of his famous paintings.
Yeah, I think you sent it to me.
And then these two people enter the room, and they're like, Vincent. And it's in modern English, so obviously it's kind of a funny thing. And Vincent's like, well, what's going on? We got great news, and they represent Vincent. They're like the artist,
his agent or something.
And they're holding Starry Night, which is like one of the most iconic, perfect, incredible things ever created, right? They're holding Starry Night, and they're like, so, met with the client, great news. They love the painting. They just have a few minor ideas. And he like stops, Vincent van Gogh stops painting. And he's like, yes, I'd love to hear the ideas the clients have about my painting. And then the two reps or agents say, they love it. It's just a little too dark. Maybe we do something in the day. And then his response is, it's called Starry Night. And then the scene cuts to, I think,
Frida Kahlo.
Someone else doing the same thing.
Yeah. Frida, the client loved the auto-portrait, the self-portrait, but we're going to have to change the eyebrows. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
It's a really good one.
Yeah. I was like, well, how about we just change it slightly so it's daytime? Or why don't we add a few more stars? And obviously, those artists should not be compared to any architects today, and an artist, and an architect is an architect. But that is what it feels like when you're creating something on your own. Now, architects are responding to a set of criteria, conditions, and information, the site and the client, right? So that information powers the design. But after we have that information, when we are sitting at our desks and we're drawing stuff, we are on our own drawing this stuff from a blank site to an entire proposal. So you do become, as an architect, when you're in it, you do become attached to what you're drawing as much as any artist is for their artwork. For right or wrong, that is what happens. You can't help but be emotionally attached because you love it, you love what you do. Therefore, for a lot of architects, when they present to the client and they already feel like they're misunderstood by people in general, they tend to be very sensitive individuals. Again, it goes back to something of what I said earlier. That is greatly mitigated if you have an architect who's confident in their work. You have an architect who is paired with the right people, as we often are. But just know that depending on who you're working with, that's something you should probably keep in mind. Again, as a way to proactively make sure that everything goes well.
Yeah, I think that's a good nugget of insights.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Into the mind of the architect.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of an awkward point in some ways.
It is.
An unexpected one, but I think it would put some of those things a bit more in context when, you meet with the architect in the next, weeks, months, years, to try and understand like where they come from when they work.
Yeah, and again, I gotta emphasize, I was very hesitant to actually even talk about the last point because I don't want to sound like the architect's always the victim and the client has to do all this work and the architect is being emotionally sensitive when they shouldn't be. I'm just stating that this is the reality a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, for someone who cares about what they do in any field, right?
Yeah.
It's receiving criticism on the work that you do in any field is always kind of like a little bit of a, not a personal attack, but you take it a little bit personally because you're invested in what you do.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And people question what you do without the whole knowledge and baggage and background of what it takes to get to that point. So you do feel a bit misunderstood, and it's always simple.
Yeah, and again, it goes both ways, right?
It does, yeah.
Architects feel like the client should be doing stuff, and clients feel like the architect should be doing stuff. So the solution is we should both just be, I think the key takeaway is be more proactive in communicating and be professional. That's actually probably the biggest things, I think.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this recording. If you like what we're doing, then please support the show by leaving a review of it in the Apple Podcasts app. You can also find the show on the YouTube channel and on Spotify, where you can subscribe and like and all that good stuff. The podcast has an Instagram handle, which is Second Studio Pod. The Office Fame Architecture Design has a podcast that has an Instagram handle as well. Podcast has a website, which is secondstudiopod.com. 400 something episodes. Between there and social media, you can find clips, reels, quotes, work images, all kinds of fun stuff. If you have an idea for a recording, a question or a topic in mind that you would like us to talk about, then let us know. We're always looking out for that, or even guest suggestions. You can also hit us up through the hotline, which is 213-222-6950. You can call or text it. If you call it, it goes to voicemail. It's another way to reach out. Beyond that, we have a lot of good guests, topics, recordings coming up. Super excited, and stay tuned for more. Talk soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.